conducted a workshop with a few teenagers where I asked them to look around themselves and pick out any object, anything at all, and then write a poem about it. Somebody chose a math textbook, somebody a rose, somebody a plant, and all of them started writing their poems. Mind you, none of these were professional poets or published writers or anything of that sort. No, they were just teenagers who had joined a workshop on a random Sunday and wanted to learn something new. Additionally, they were told to work upon a twist within their poetry. They were told to write political poetry. That is, to connect the seemingly random object that they have chosen with something that they saw in society, something that they considered political. One person picked a candle, and they wrote about the hands that prepared that candle, the hands that could perhaps never afford to purchase that very candle to light up their own home. Another person picked a novel. They picked The White Tiger by Arvind Adiga, which is one of my favorite books. And they wrote a story about an actual tiger wanting to escape from behind a cage. Another person picked a marker and wrote about how the blue ink of that marker symbolizes the legacy of the United States. Now, maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but that was exactly the point of that activity and perhaps of this talk too. To stretch our preconceived notions of what is art, what is political, and what it means to demand a revolution through our art, to demand change through our art. First and foremost, I would like to talk about the sociological imagination, theorized by C.W. Mills back in the day, but still very much relevant today. It's essentially the understanding that all of our so-called personal problems are actually connected to deeper and broader systems in place that are far greater than us individuals alone. What this means is there is actually no hardcore distinction between personal and private issues and public issues. So you may be whining about your approaching college assignment deadlines, about how you had a bad friendship breakup, about how your family maybe does not respect your privacy, and all of these issues are totally valid. But trust me when I say this, they're not individualistic as such. They're connected to systems in place, systems of capitalism, of imperialism, of social structures that determine how families and friendships really function. Let me take one scenario, okay? Something that I personally relate to, maybe you can relate to. It's the example of us having the inability to go even one day without ordering off our favorite fast food delivery app. Now, that may seem like a problem that is driven by my own greed and my own gluttony, and maybe that's correct. But it's actually connected to a lot of other things. It's connected to the human condition which always seeks instant gratification. It's connected to the algorithms that have been deployed by these fast food delivery apps, the algorithms that know exactly how you work. So when you log on to that app the fourth time the same night and you're magically offered 100 rupees discount, they know the way to your heart. This is also connected to the gig economy, the economy wherein delivery partners work in precarious working situations and are not paid nearly enough of what they deserve. So yes, you may go ahead, order your pizza, open Netflix, go into your covers, postpone your college school assignment by just another day, and everything will seem perfect. But everything is by design. Everything is political. Now, I think when I say the word political, all of you immediately come to the edges of your seats, worried about what I will say next, what controversy I may cause, how I may even get cancelled right now. And trust me, that won't happen, I hope. Political mistakenly has been associated with the word partisan. It's been connected to some sort of ideological extremity. It's been associated with violence, with money, with muscle power. Additionally, it's been connected to perhaps the physical manifestations of politics. That is an election, a parliament, a vote, a legislature. All of these things are correct, but they're incredibly limited. Political, the word by definition, means public affairs. Anything that is collective, anything that extends beyond the individual, that is shared by people. So from the sociological imagination, we understand that there is no hardcore distinction between the personal and the public. If we connect that to this, we realize that there is actually no hardcore distinction between the political and the non-political, because political essentially comprises the public. Now, let me give you some examples. Let me give you some art, right? So when the people in my activity, they looked around themselves, all of them found something political. How did they do that? Let's see. So this is an art piece called Sometimes Making Something Leads to Nothing. This is essentially an art piece where artist Francis Alice pushes this massive block of ice for over 9 hours in the city of Mexico. That is art. It has a lot of definitions and a lot of interpretations. One of them states that this represents the struggles of the ordinary residents of Mexico City and how sometimes their hard work and the work that they put in leads to nothing. Let's look at this. This is the Heidelberg Project. Tyler Guyton was a seemingly ordinary resident of Detroit who created the Heidelberg Project when he was very saddened by the state of the neighborhoods in Detroit that he had grown up in. So he took some furniture, he took some toys, and he made this whimsical yet haunting art piece that raised some essential questions regarding matters of poverty, race, and urban neglect. So what I mean to say from all of this is that when the people in my activity, they looked around themselves, they took that random object, they stared at it for a while, the materials behind it, the people behind it, the system under which it was produced, all of them found something to say. And this act of saying something, saying anything, because you have the need to, because it comes to you, that is art. Art imitates life, and life imitates art. That's a paraphrased Oscar Wilde quote. And maybe I'm getting a little too abstract at this point, but what I mean to say is that right now, as all of us look around ourselves, we see this stage, we see these plants, these people, this auditorium. All of these things have the potential to be converted into art. And from these artworks, you see the people behind these artworks, you realize that everybody has the potential to become an artist. Everybody has the potential to make art. And essentially, everybody has the potential to demand change through their art, to demand a revolution through their art. Sociologists have always argued that everyday things that we do, that is, humming a tune when we go to work, or maybe doing some new room decor on a random weekend because we felt like, or maybe rearranging our furniture, or drawing in the stand when we're at the beach. All of these are demonstrations of artistic expression. Therefore, art is not something that only people who visit fancy parties in New York City or cool art galleries in New Delhi. No, not just for them. Art is instead a birthright, an instinct that is shared by all of us. Throughout my experience as an organizer, an activist, and a student researcher in the field of artivism, democracy, and political empowerment, I've had a few key learnings about these things, especially about art for public good, that I would like to share with all of you today. The first one being the very essential distinction between creation and production. Production leads to merely products. Products that are economic in value, products that can be traded, bought, and sold, products that do not exactly value the sentiment behind their creation, products that only value marketability and utility. Creation, on the other hand, is something totally different. Creation values the human emotion embedded in the process. Creation is not something that can happen by one person alone, with them sitting behind a desk and doing it all individualistically. No. Creation brings together communities, it brings together people. Events like this, it involves socializing, it involves bonding, laughing, talking, and whatever the end result is, however vague, however abstract, that is the creative expression, that is the artistic expression so critiqued. We're all living in a capitalist economy. Productive is the hot word. It's the word that every good student and every good employee should always be. We're always supposed to be and expected to be productive. We're all producing for somebody and we're all consuming the massive amount of media that we're surrounded by at any given point. And let me tell you that in these circumstances, the first revolution or the first act of resistance that you can do right now is actually creating. Not producing, no, but creating. When we keep our phones down, the phones which are, let's say, designed to keep our minds passive, overstimulated, overloaded with information from who knows where, when we keep that down and instead we go pick up a paintbrush, a pen, a camera, not because our school assignment wants us to, not because somebody is asking us to, not because DALL-E is not producing the best AI images that particular day, but because we want to, because we have something to say. That is art, that is creation. And this need, this urgency to say something is the root of all revolutions, which is further supplemented by art. In today's day and age, there are lots of times where we feel like we're not in control of our lives. where we feel unheard, unseen, unnoticed. And it is in these times that we should go to create something. I think words like revolution and resistance are big and fancy and outside of our sociology books, and they sound very appealing, but they mean nothing if you don't start from your immediate circumstances, the immediate lifestyles. And trust me when I say this, our immediate lifestyle is designed in such a way to make us forget that we're all artists, that we're all theaters. That's what we are before all else. Secondly, I want to share with all of you that historically, art has been used both to help the revolution and to prevent the revolution. So as we use art for public good and as we use artistic expression and creation for the good things, we need to be realizing that it has always been used for the opposite as well. Let's look at this painting. This is a part of all of our history textbooks. This is Napoleon crossing the Alps. I hope you can see it. This is made by Jacques-Louis David. And this is a propaganda tool used back in the day during Napoleon's campaign against Austria, which paints Napoleon in a very triumphant pose with conventionally attractive male looks. And it was, widely spread and widely used to gain public support. Now let's look at this painting. This is a reimagination of that painting made by black artist Cahin de Valle, and he put a black person in the place of Napoleon. The artist is an ardent critique of Eurocentric history, and if you see his perspective, like his reimagination of this artwork offers a more humane perspective to the hyper-masculine features that were shown before. So as we deploy art and as we deploy this medium for public good, we must always realize that it's not a one-way street. Historically, it's been used for multiple things. Third, I have learned through my experiences working and researching and, meeting people that art is not something that is a means to an end. Art will not, allow you to pass a law or maybe reform the police system or rebuild the judiciary system in the span of one night, 1 week, or maybe 1 year for that matter. No. Art does something far more than this. So through my research, I've been focusing on protest art, which has been created especially by students and in public sites. I've learned how this protest art or this revolutionary art has the power to bring together communities, marginalized communities on the basis of caste, religion, disability, gender, all through poetry, through film, through theater, through dance, through visual art. This art that is so produced, this public art, this democratic art, is not restricted to the elite art gallery spaces which actually commodify this art, which put a price tag to each art piece, which allows these art pieces to be traded and bought and sold. They become products. Art is also not restricted to perhaps the Bollywood industry, which is maybe the most widely talked about form of art, which is, at the end of the day, an industry. It makes money and propagates only a particular ideology that it wants to consciously feed to the masses. Instead, such public art, such democratic art, such participatory art is produced by the public, for the public, at public sites. Additionally, it really totally blurs the lines between an artist and a non-artist. For instance, if a university-going student calls her school-going sister to come to the university space to paint the walls, to paint the streets, who exactly is an artist? They're not professional artists. No, they're not even belonging to that university. There's a movement happening. They need voices, they need people to hold a paintbrush, and that's why it is here. There is no spectator, there's no outsider. Everybody is a part of the movement. That is why it's participatory and so-called revolutionary art. Such art is not a means to an end, as I say. It doesn't work like, hey, let's come together, let's make this visual art piece, and tomorrow the government will give us exactly what we want. No, not at all. It's more like, hey, things are really bad right now. Nobody seems to be listening to us. What do? Let's come together. Let's sing a song. Let's feel better. That's what this art is. It's a means of survival before it is a means of resistance and before it is a means of the revolution. It is a way for communities to have collective memory, for them to have something to name that pain. So as we use art for the revolution, as we use creation as a tool of resistance, I want all of us to remember two very essential facts about human nature. First and foremost, we are social creatures. We have survived all of this while because we know how to form groups, to forge communities. art for the revolution cannot happen by one person alone, just making something on Procreate and uploading it on Instagram. No, that's not the revolution, I'm afraid. Art for the revolution happens when you form groups, when you come together with people, because we are social people. Secondly, we are creative. For centuries, for millennia, we have forged stories. We have created religion. We have created fiction. We have created art all our lives. And even though we may forget it at a lot of points, but we're all artists at heart. We really are. So when we bring together these two facets of human nature, our social side and our creative side, we get art for the revolution. So before I conclude, I would like to quote one of my favorite poets, Adrienne Rich, an American poet. She said that poetry is not a revolution, but it's a way of knowing why the revolution must come. Thank you.